The frost came early to Ardmore that year. It crept over the stones of the outer yard before the last of the harvest carts had even been unloaded, and by the time the moon rose, it had turned every puddle in the courtyard into a pane of gray glass. Nerita Fell walked across them without breaking a single one. She had learned how to move through this place quietly. 5 winters had taught her that much. She carried a small clay jar wrapped in wool against her chest. Inside it was the tincture she made every third night for the king, bitter root and crushed willow and something her mother had once called wolfsbane in a whisper. Casimir Rook suffered headaches that split his skull open from the inside. He would not tell his healers. He would not tell his council. He told her, once, in the dark of a winter corridor, and she had been making the tincture ever since, without either of them ever speaking about it again. That was the shape of things between them. Never spoken. Always understood. The keep rose above her, black against a sky the color of old iron. Torches burned in the high windows of the council chamber. They were still sitting then. They had been sitting since noon. Nerita climbed the servant's stair because it was warmer and because nobody used it after dark. Her boots made almost no sound on the worn stone. She had come to Ardmore at 19 years old, with a bundle of clothes, and a name that was not quite hers, and she had spent every day since learning how to be invisible in a house that had never decided what she was. Not a servant. Servants had wages and a village to go home to. Not a guest. Guests were permitted to leave. Ward of the treaty. That was the phrase the stewards used when they had to write her down in a ledger. Ward of the Treaty of the Iron Ford, given to Ardmore by the northern kingdom of Sarnholt in the season of the truce, to be held in good faith for as long as the peace endured. She had stopped resenting the words years ago. They had become simply what she was, the way a stone is a stone. And yet, 3 nights past, Casimir had found her on the north wall, watching the first snow come down over the pines. He had stood beside her for a long while without speaking. Then he had said her name, only her name, in a voice she had never heard him use with anyone else, and when she turned to look at him, he had already started to say something more. The horn had sounded before he could finish it. Riders at the gate. He had gone. She had thought about that unfinished sentence every hour since. She was thinking about it now, climbing the stair with the jar warm against her ribs, and that was why she did not notice at first that the voices ahead of her were raised. The council chamber door stood open by the width of a hand. Light spilled through the gap and lay across the corridor floor in a long yellow blade. Nerita stopped just short of it. She knew better than to walk into a room where the Rooks were arguing. The first voice she recognized was Odile. Casimir's aunt had governed Ardmore through his father's last long illness and the first years of his own reign, and she had never entirely handed the kingdom back. She spoke the way she moved, without hurry, as though everything in the room was already decided, and she was merely explaining it to slower minds. "The seal is Sarnholt's," Odile said. "The hand is hers. It was folded inside the lining of her chest, beneath the winter linens. My woman found it this morning." Nerita's fingers tightened around the jar. A letter. In her room. Beneath her linens. She had never written to Sarnholt. She had never received a single word from Sarnholt. In 5 winters, not one rider had come north to south to ask after her. Not one name from her childhood had ever been spoken aloud in this keep, and she had long ago made her peace with the fact that whoever had handed her over had simply closed the door behind her and walked away. "Then she is a spy," said a second voice, lighter, pleased. "I have said so for years. Everyone has been very kind about pretending otherwise. Sabine Corwen, daughter of the Eastern Holdings, twice proposed as Luna, twice politely declined, and still somehow at every council table where decisions were made. There will be a trial," Odile said. "There must be. The pack will demand it. And there will be a sentence. Because the sentence for a spy inside an alpha's household is not a thing I invented, Casimir. It is written down. It has been written down for 400 years. Silence. Narita realized she had stopped breathing. She waited for him. She waited for the voice she had heard on the north wall, the one that had said her name like it weighed something. No. Casimir. Flat. Cold. A stone dropped into a well. No trial. You cannot simply refuse, Odile said. The evidence exists. The pack will hear of it by morning. Then let the pack hear this instead. His chair scraped back. His footsteps crossed the room. There will be no trial because a trial is a thing you give to a person. And she is not one. Nerita's hand went out to the wall. She has no standing here. No blood, no pack, no name that any register in this kingdom recognizes. She was not born into this house and she was not chosen into it. She was delivered to it, in autumn, in a cart, with a document. The blade of light lay across the floor and she stared at it and could not make her eyes move. You are all very concerned with what she is, Casimir said. So let me end it. She is not a woman. She is not a threat. She is not worth the trouble of a trial or the honor of a sentence. A pause. 1 heartbeat. 2. She is a bargain, nothing more. The jar slipped. Narita caught it against her body before it fell, but the wool had loosened and the clay struck the wall on the way, and there was a sound, small and sharp and unmistakable, of something breaking. Inside the chamber, every voice stopped at once. Who is there? Odile said. Narita said nothing. She was already moving. She went down the servants' stair faster than she had ever gone down it. One hand on the wall, the tincture soaking cold and bitter through the wool and into the front of her dress. And behind her she heard the council door swing wide and boots come out into the corridor. She did not stop at the bottom. She did not go to her room, because they had already been in her room. She crossed the yard with her head down, and the frost cracking under her boots now. Every step a small betrayal, and she did not slow until she reached the low stone building beside the granary where Ardenmore kept its ledgers, the record house, the only door in the keep that was never locked, because nobody in 5 winters had ever thought there was anything inside it worth stealing. Narita pushed it open and went in. There was a lamp burning at the far table, and a boy asleep beside it with ink on his cheek and his head resting on a stack of grain writs. Tavi was 11 years old and had been apprenticed to the record house since he was 6, which meant he had spent most of his life in a room full of paper and knew where every single sheet of it lived. He sat up when the door banged. Then he saw her face and went very still. Mistress Nerida. The treaty, she said. Her voice did not sound like her own. The treaty of the Iron Ford. Bring it to me. He did not ask why. He went into the shelves, and he was gone long enough that she had time to notice her hands were shaking, and then he came back carrying a flat wooden case with a strip of faded ribbon around it. She untied the ribbon herself. The parchment inside was stiff with age, and smelled of dust and cold. She had never seen it before. In 5 winters she had never once asked to see the document that had decided the whole of her life, because asking would have meant admitting how much she wanted to know what it said about her, and she had needed very badly to not want anything. She read the first line. Then she read it again. Then she looked up at the boy and said, in a voice gone strangely quiet, Tavi, what season did I come to Ardenmore? He blinked. Autumn, mistress. Everyone knows that. My mother says you came in the same week they slaughtered the pigs. Which autumn? 5 back. The wet one. Nerida looked down at the parchment. She knew how these things lived because she had carried enough of them across enough courtyards. A treaty was not written once and left alone. The war had ended 19 winters ago, and ever since then the terms had been engrossed fresh whenever the old sheet went soft at the folds, copied out entire by a clerk and sealed again by both thrones, and only the standing copy carried any force at all. The old sheet went into the fire. That was ordinary. That was simply how it had always been done. This was the standing copy. It said so at the foot of it, in the flat little phrase clerks use, and the standing copy had been sealed in spring. The spring after. She counted it twice in her head, and then a third time, because it was not possible for the sum to keep coming out the same way and still mean what it meant. She had been living inside these walls for 5 months before the only page in the world that gave her to Ardenmore was ever written. "Bring the lamp closer," she said. Tavi brought it. The light slid across the parchment and Nerida bent low over the writing, and now that she was looking properly, she could see what she had missed. The body of the treaty was written in one hand, small even, sloping slightly to the right. Terms of the truce. The withdrawal of Sarnholt's riders from the Iron Ford, the exchange of prisoners, the obligations of both kingdoms in the event of famine. And then, in the 8th clause, squeezed into a space that was noticeably too small for it, in ink a shade darker and a hand that was not the same hand at all, was her name. Nerida Fell, Ward, given in good faith. The letters were cramped. The last 2 were nearly touching the edge of the clause. Whoever had written them had been fitting words into a gap that already existed. "Tavi," she said. "The seal." He leaned in, and then he made a small sound in his throat. "That's not right." "Say it plainly." "That's not the Sarnholt seal." He put his finger just above the wax, not quite touching it. "I see the real one 4 times a year on the grain writs. The northern seal has a broken ring around the outside. Broken at the top. Like a crown that isn't closed. This one is whole." Nerida stared at the wax. A whole ring. A clean circle. A seal that belonged to nobody. Behind her, out in the yard, she heard men calling to one another and the sound of a door being thrown open somewhere near the kitchens. They were searching the keep for whoever had been standing in that corridor. She barely heard it, because the thing she was holding in her hands was not a treaty at all, and every single thing she had believed about herself for 5 winters had just come apart in a cold room that smelled of dust. Sarnholt had never given her away. Somebody in Ardenmore had taken her, and then written the paperwork afterwards. The court gathered at midday in the long hall, as it did on the first frost of every year, and by then Nerida had not slept at all. She stood where she always stood, at the back, near the pillar, in the place where the household staff were permitted to watch. Her dress still carried the faint bitter smell of spilled willow root. Nobody had come for her in the night. That surprised her more than anything else. She had expected to be dragged from her bed at dawn, and instead, she had lain awake until the light came, listening to the keep go about its business as though the world had not ended. The long hall filled. Elders on the benches, warriors along the wall. Sabine Corwin at the second table in a gown the color of wine, laughing at something. Odile took the seat at the king's right hand, and Casimir came in last, and he was looking for someone before he had even reached the dais. Nerida watched him find her. She watched something loosen in his shoulders when he did. She watched him take his seat and then look back at her twice more in the space of a minute, and if she had not stood in that corridor the night before, she might have let herself believe it meant something. The envoy from Sarnholt was announced. He came up the length of the hall in a gray riding coat still wet at the shoulders, a broad older man with a soldier's walk and a hard flat face, and he gave the King of Ardenmore exactly as much bow as the truce required, and not 1 inch more. "Osric Vane," he said, "for the northern throne. I am sent to stand for the northern throne at the reading of the terms, as the truce requires at every first frost." "The terms are known to us," Odile said smoothly. "They will be honored." "Then let them be read." There was a small pause. It was the sort of pause that would have meant nothing to anybody who had not spent the night in the record house. "That will not be necessary," Odile said. The terms are unchanged. And Nerida heard herself speak. On what date was it sealed? Every head in the long hall turned. She had not planned it. She had not decided to do it. The words simply left her, and once they were out in the air of that room, there was no possible way to call them back. And so she stepped out from behind the pillar and walked 3 paces forward and said it again, louder. On what date was the standing copy of the Treaty of the Iron Ford sealed? The silence that came down was total. Casimir was on his feet. Nerida, you know the date. You put your hand to it at every reading. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Say it. He did not answer at once. She watched him look at Odile, and she watched Odile not look back, and something in the older woman's stillness told Nerida more than any confession could have. The 11th day of the thaw, Casimir said. In the spring. Which spring? Nerida. Which spring, my king? He said it. He gave her the year. And she watched it travel through the hall, from the elders on the benches to the stewards at the side table to the warriors along the wall, all of them doing the same small piece of arithmetic she had done at a lamp-lit table at 3 a.m. She had been living in Ardenmoor for 5 months when the ink went onto that page. An elder near the front said something under his breath. Somebody else asked him to repeat it. The hall began to make the low, uneven noise of a room where nobody wants to be the first to say the obvious thing out loud. Casimir stood very still on the dais, and Nerida saw his face change, and the thing that came into it was not guilt. It was confusion. He turned his head slowly toward his aunt, and Odile said in a voice of perfect calm, "Dates are copied out by clerks. Clerks make errors. If this hall intends to be governed by the penmanship of dead men, we will be here until the spring." It was smooth. It was reasonable. It was the kind of answer that ends a conversation, and it very nearly did. Then a chair scraped. Osric Vane had risen from the envoy's bench. He was not looking at the king. He was not looking at Odile. He had turned fully around, and he was staring down the length of the long hall at Nerida with an expression she could not read at all. And he was staring at the place where the collar of her dress had pulled aside when she stepped forward, at the pale mark on her collarbone, the one she had carried since birth, the one shaped like a ring that did not quite close. The old soldier's face had gone entirely white. "Moon above," he said. And then he said a name. Nin Naira. Afterwards, when Nerida tried to put those moments back together, the thing she remembered was how fast it happened. Not the shouting, the speed. Osric Vane had barely finished saying the name before Odile was on her feet. "Seize him." Nobody questioned it. That was the strangest part. The warriors along the wall moved before the king had spoken, before anyone in the hall had understood what the old envoy had said. 2 of them took Osric by the arms. A third put a hand across his mouth. "He is an envoy," Casimir said. "Under truce. He is a sick old man raving in a foreign hall. If he says one more word, we will have a war over it. Take him to the guest tower and let him sleep it off." They dragged him out. He did not fight them. He kept his eyes on Nerida the whole way down the hall, still trying to speak behind the hand across his mouth, and the last thing she saw before the doors closed was that his eyes were wet. The hall broke into noise. Nerida stood in the middle of it and did not move, and because she did not move, she was able to watch. She watched Sabine Corwen. She had been looked at by that woman for 5 winters, and she knew every flavor of it. The bored glance, the sharp little laugh when her name came up at a table. Sabine had gone the color of milk. Her hand had closed around the stem of her cup so hard that the wine was trembling in it, and she was not looking at Nerida at all. She was looking at Odile and waiting. That was not jealousy. Nerida had seen jealousy on that face for years, and it had never once looked like this. That was fear. Then she watched Casimir, He came down off the dais saying her name, and there was something raw in his face, and for one traitorous half of a second the 5 winters rose up in her, and she almost went to him. Nerida. Whatever that was, I did not know it. I swear it on my father's grave. You knew the date, she said. He stopped. You have read that date aloud in this hall at every first frost since the autumn I came here. And I have stood at that pillar each time and listened to you do it. You knew the date. I knew the autumn. Neither of us ever put them beside each other. He had no answer. She watched him reach for one and find nothing, and she understood, with a coldness that was becoming familiar, that his confusion was probably real and that it changed nothing at all. Escort the ward to the North Tower, Odile said behind them. Half this hall has just heard a foreign name attached to her. She will be safer behind a door. Aunt. You may thank me later. 2 guards took Nerida's elbows. Not roughly. That was somehow worse. They walked her out with the whole court watching, up 4 flights of stairs to a round room with a fire already lit and a bed already made. And she understood as the bolt went across that it had been prepared before the court had gathered. Somebody had known this morning that she would need locking up by afternoon. Nerida stood at the narrow window and watched the light go out of the sky. The mark on her collarbone had never meant anything. A birthmark, pale against pale, a ring that stopped just short of joining itself. Marte had called it a kettle burn, and Nerida had believed that for years, until she was old enough to understand that burns do not come in perfect circles. She pressed 2 fingers against it now, and something moved in her. Snow coming down thick and slow past a window too high for her to reach. A room with a stone floor. A woman's voice singing in a language she did not speak. A gray coat, and the smell of wet wool and horses, and cold air on her face, and her own voice going up and up into the dark shouting a word she did not know. Nerida gasped and caught the sill. It was gone as fast as it came. The harder she reached after it, the further it went, until all that was left was the smell of wet wool and a feeling in her chest like a door slamming. The bolt scraped back. Odile came in alone and closed the door behind her. She did not sit. She stood in the middle of the room with her hands folded, and she looked at Nerida with an expression that was almost kind, and Nerida thought she would never in her life see anything more frightening. Where is Osric Vane? Asleep. Genuinely asleep. I am not a monster, whatever you decided about me this afternoon. She moved to the fire. I have come to offer you something. You have come to see how much I know. Both things can be true. She drew a folded paper from her sleeve and set it on the table. Passage. A horse, a purse, and a name at the southern port that will put you on a ship without questions. Tonight, while the household sleeps. Nerida looked at the paper and did not touch it. You would let me go. I would rather you went. Last night you wanted a trial. Something crossed Odile's face. It was gone almost at once, but Nerida had spent the whole of that day learning to watch for it. Last night, Odile said carefully, was a different day. And there it was again. Not anger, not calculation, fear. You are afraid of me, Nerida said slowly. I am afraid of what you are about to become. They are not the same thing, and you will not understand the difference for some time yet. Then explain it. No. Odile went to the door. Take the horse, girl. It is the only kind ending anyone in this house will offer you, and there will not be a second one. The bolt went across. Nerida stood looking at the folded paper for a long time. Then, far below the window, a horn sounded. Not Ardenmoor's horn. Ardenmoor's was 2 long notes and a short one. This was 3 short and 1 long, and it came up out of the dark from the northern road, and it was answered by the shouting of men on the gate. Nerida went to the window. Torches, A great many of them moving fast, and at the head of them a banner she had never seen in her life snapping in the frost wind, and even at that distance she could make out the shape stamped on it, a ring that did not close. Casimir came at the 3rd hour of the night. She heard the bolt and did not turn around. She was still at the window. The Sarnholt riders had been led as far as the outer yard and no further, and their fires were burning down there in neat rows, and she had been watching them for hours the way a person watches a fire they are not yet permitted to warm themselves at. "They will not tell me anything," he said. "Varga will not come inside the walls. He says he will not sleep under a roof that holds a woman against her will. He sounds tiresome." "He is." A pause. "Nerida, look at me." She turned. He had come alone, without guard or steward, still in the clothes he had worn in the hall, and there was gray in his face that had not been there in the morning. In 5 winters she had watched this man break a rebel alpha's jaw in the practice yard and then sit up all night with a dying kennel hound because it did not like to be alone. She knew him. That was the trouble. She had always thought she knew him. "Whatever you have been told about last night in the council," he said, "it is not what you think." "Say it again then." "What?" "What you said in the council." "If it is not what I think, you will not mind repeating it to my face." She folded her arms so that he would not see her hands. "Say it again, my king." He went absolutely still. She watched it arrive in him. She watched the moment he understood that the sound in the corridor had been her, that she had stood 4 paces from that door with his medicine in her hands, and the way his face came apart then was almost enough to make her look away. "You heard. I heard. Nerida, if you heard that, then you heard it without the rest of it. Odile had a letter. She had it in front of the elders, and she had the law behind her, and she was going to have you tried for a spy by nightfall. And there is one sentence for that, and it is not exile. There was one thing in the whole world I could say in that room that would keep you breathing, and I said it." "I know." He stopped. "I worked it out somewhere around the 2nd hour," she said. "I am not stupid. You saved my life by telling a room full of the most powerful wolves in this kingdom that I am not a person, and you were right, and it worked." "Then you understand." "I understand completely." Her voice did not rise. That was the thing she was proudest of afterwards, that it did not rise. "You saved me with the only weapon you had. And the reason it was the only weapon you had is that it was true. It has been true for 5 winters. You did not invent it in that room. You reached for it, and it was there. Because everyone in this house, including you, has always known exactly what I am, and none of you were ever going to say it out loud until saying it was useful. That is not fair." "No," she agreed. "It is not." He crossed the room toward her, and she let him get halfway before she asked the question. "Was I bought? Or was I stolen?" He stopped. "I do not know," Casimir said. "You are the king of this place." "I do not know." Something broke in his voice on the second saying. "I have been trying to find out since noon, and every door I have opened has been locked behind me for 20 years by a woman who taught me to read. I do not know. Give me time, and I will know." "How much time?" "Nerida." "How much?" She stepped back from him. "You are asking me to wait inside a locked room in a house that forged a document to explain me. 5 winters I have waited. I waited for someone from the north to ask after me, and nobody ever did. And now I know why nobody ever did. And you are standing there asking me for more of the only thing I have left." She went past him to the door. It was not bolted. He had not bolted it behind him. She had noticed that when he came in, and she had been thinking about it ever since. "Nerida, you told them I was a bargain," she said. "Let us find out what I am worth." She went down 4 flights of stair with her heart going like a hammer, and Casimir's boots behind her the whole way, and through the long hall where the elders were still sitting over the wreckage of the day, and out through the great doors into the frost, and every single head in that hall came up and followed her out. The Sarnholt fires were burning low in the outer yard. Men rose as she came, 100 faces turning, and the banner overhead with its broken ring, and at the center of it a man getting up slowly from a camp stool beside the largest fire. Anselm Varga was younger than she had expected, perhaps 35, dark and lean and travel-worn, with a plain soldier's coat and no crown on him anywhere, and he watched her come the whole way across that yard without saying a word. Nerita stopped in front of him. Behind her, the doorway of the long hall had filled with the court of Ardenmoor. Casimir was on the steps. She did not look back at him. "I am the ward of the Treaty of the Iron Ford," she said, loud enough to carry. "And the treaty is a forgery. I am asking the Northern Throne for its protection." The yard went silent. Anselm Varga looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something nobody in that yard expected. He knelt. "I have been looking for you for 19 years, he said. Tavi found her an hour before dawn. She was sitting in the guest tent the Sarnholt riders had raised for her against the outer wall, still fully dressed, still wide awake. And the boy came under the flap with ink on his fingers and a wooden case under his arm and his eyes enormous. "They said I could come as far as the fire," he said. "I ran. You should be asleep. So should you, mistress." He put the case down on the ground between them. It was the flat case with the faded ribbon. "You left it on the table. I thought you would want it. And I brought the other book because you never asked for it, and I think you should have." "Which book?" "The Visitor's Ledger." He said it the way another child might have said the cat had kittens. "Everything that comes off the shelves gets signed for. Everything. My master says a record house without a ledger is just a room full of paper." Nerita looked at him. "Show me." He turned the pages with the confidence of somebody in his own kingdom. The entries went back further than she would have guessed. Small and cramped, hundreds of them, decades of clerks signing out grain writs and land grants and marriage rolls. "There," he said. "The treaty case. It comes out every year. Always in the week before the first frost reading. That is her ladyship Odile. She always comes at night." "And before that?" "Before that, it only comes out once." His finger went down the page and stopped. "This one is the first. Everything after is Odile." Nerita bent over the ledger. The entry was 5 winters old. Autumn, the wet one, the week they slaughtered the pigs. The clerk had noted the case out and the case back the same evening, and beside it, in the column where the borrower signed, there was a name. The letters were small and even and sloped slightly to the right, and then cramped hard at the end as though the hand that wrote them had been squeezing them into a space that was too small. She had seen that hand before. She had seen it 2 hours ago, wedged into the 8th clause of a treaty, spelling out the words "ward," given in good faith. And she had seen it before that. She had seen it on the inside cover of a book of herbs, and on the labels of 100 jars in a cold pantry, and on the note that had been pinned to her bundle on the morning the cart came for her, the note she had carried in her pocket for 2 winters until it fell apart. "Mistress," said Tavi, "do you know her?" Nerita could not answer him at first. The name on the ledger was Marty Fell, the woman who had raised her. The woman who had told her the mark on her collarbone was a kettle burn. The woman who had stood at the gate of the croft with her hands folded and watched the cart take her away and had not waved. The woman she had spent 5 winters calling mother in her own head because there had never been anybody else to give the word to. She had not been sold to Ardenmoor by Sarnholt. She had been written into that treaty by the only person in the world she had ever trusted. Nerita went back inside the walls at first light, and she went in through the front. That was Anselm's doing. He had offered her 4 riders, and she had said no, and then he had looked at her for a moment and said that in that case, she should at least walk slowly, because a woman who walks slowly through a gate she was carried through is saying something, and the whole yard would be watching her say it. So she walked slowly. The guards on the inner door did not stop her. Nobody had told them what she was anymore. That was the first small pleasure she had taken in 5 winters, and she was not proud of how much she enjoyed it. She was halfway along the West Gallery when Sabine Corwin stepped out in front of her. "You cannot see him. I am going to the guest tower." "You cannot see him," Sabine repeated, and her voice was wrong. Too high. She had not slept either. There was powder caked at the corner of her eye, where she had put it on over yesterday's face. "The envoy is unwell. Her ladyship has given orders." Her ladyship gave orders about a great many things. Nerida did not stop walking. "Move. You do not understand what you are standing in the middle of." "Then tell me." Sabine put a hand on her arm. It was the first time in 5 winters that woman had willingly touched her, and Nerida looked down at the hand and then up at the face above it, and she saw that Sabine Corwin was not trying to stop her. Sabine Corwin was holding on. "When did you find out?" Nerida said quietly. "I do not know what you mean." "You went white in that hall before anybody else in the room had understood a single thing. You did not go white because a foreign envoy said a name. You went white because you already knew the name." Nerida turned to face her fully. "When?" Sabine's mouth worked. 3 winters ago," she said. "There it was. She told me because she needed me quiet," Sabine said. The words came out fast now, tumbling, as though they had been packed in somewhere under pressure for 3 years and something had finally cracked. "She said the king would never take a Luna while you were under this roof, and that when you were gone there would be a seat, and that if I ever wanted to sit in it, I would say nothing and see nothing, and let her manage the rest." And I said, "Yes." I said yes without asking one question, and I have gone to bed every night for 3 years next to the fact that I said yes. "You watched me carry his medicine up that stair." "Yes." "You laughed at me in front of the Eastern table." "Yes." "For a chair." Sabine's face crumpled. "For a chair." Nerida found that she felt nothing at all. She had expected fury. She had been carrying it around all night like a hot stone in her pocket, and now that she had it in front of her, she discovered it had gone cold and gray and useless, and what she had instead was something much more efficient. "You will write it down," she said. "What?" "Everything she told you. Every date. Every name. Every promise. You will write it down, and you will sign it, and you will give it to the boy in the record house, and he will put it in the ledger with a witness mark, and it will exist." Nerida took her arm back. "You have spent 3 years being useful to her. Be useful to me for 1 morning, and I will not speak your name in front of the northern throne." Sabine stared at her. "Or do not," Nerida said, "and find out what I say instead." She left her standing in the gallery. The guest tower was 4 turns of stair and a long corridor, and there were no guards on the door at the top, which was the first thing that was wrong. The second thing was that the door was open. Nerida stood in the doorway of a small warm room. There was a fire banked low and a jug of wine barely touched, and a bed that had been slept in and then stripped, and a gray riding coat still hanging on the back of the chair, with the frost damp not yet gone out of the shoulders. Osric Vane was not in it. The postern gate on the eastern wall was the one they used for night carts and quiet business, and Nerida reached it with her lungs burning and Tavi running behind her because he had refused to be left, and she came around the corner of the granary just in time to see the cart. 4 men. A closed cart. And Osric Vane on the ground beside it with his wrists tied and a cloth across his mouth, being lifted like a sack of grain. "Stop." They did not stop. One of them glanced at her and kept working, and that told her everything about what she was still worth inside these walls. I said stop. "Do as she says." Casimir came out of the dark of the granary arch with 6 of his own warriors behind him, and the men at the cart froze, and Nerida understood that he had been following her since the gallery. "Your Majesty," said the eldest of them, "her ladyship's orders. The envoy is to be returned to the northern border for his own safety." Bound and gagged. He was raving. Cut him loose. Nobody moved. That was the moment. Nerida saw it happen, and she would remember it for the rest of her life, the exact half-second in which the men in that yard had to decide whose kingdom they were standing in. "Cut him loose," Casimir said again, and this time there was something underneath his voice that made the frost creak. "Or I will come and do it myself, and none of you will enjoy that." They cut him loose. Osric came up off the cold ground coughing. He did not go for the cart or the gate or his own men. He came straight to Nerida and stopped an arm's length away and looked at her the way a man looks at a thing he has stopped believing in. "Do you know me?" he said. "No." "No." He nodded slowly, as though he had expected that and had needed to hear it anyway. "You were 5 years old. There is no reason on this earth you should. But I put you on my saddle every morning that summer and walked you around the yard, and you would not go inside until I said it. And so I said it every day for 2 years." "Said what?" Osric Vane straightened up. He was an old man with rope burns on his wrists, standing in a stranger's yard in the cold, and he said it the way he must have said it to a child, in a voice much too gentle for his face. Little ring, come home and close." The yard went out from under her. Snow passed a high window, a stone floor and a rug on it with a burn in one corner. A woman singing in a language she did not speak, and a man's voice under it laughing, and hands lifting her up onto something warm and enormous that moved beneath her, and the words, those words, said down into the top of her head, where her hair parted. "Little ring, come home and close," every morning, every single morning of a life she had never known she had. And more came with it, in the wrong order, faster than she could take them. A wooden bird on a string, somebody's cold hands warming her feet, a staircase she had counted going up and never got to the end of, the sound of a door with a bad hinge that she had known so well she could hear it now. In a frozen yard 100 leagues south, more clearly than she could hear the men breathing around her. She had thought her life began in a croft with a woman who did not wave. It had not. It had begun somewhere else, and it had been full. And somebody had come in the night and lifted her out of the middle of it. Nerida heard herself make a sound she had never made before. She was on her knees on the stone, and she did not remember getting there. Tavi had hold of her sleeve. Somebody was saying her name. Nerida. Casimir. Kneeling in front of her. Reaching. She looked up at him, and the memory was still coming in pieces. Snow and wool and singing. And behind it, cold and clean and terrible, the arithmetic. "You were 13, she said. He went still. "When the cart came the first time, when they brought a small girl into this house and told everybody she was a servant's child. You were 13 years old and you lived in this keep." Her voice was shaking now and she could not stop it. "Casimir, did you see me?" He did not answer. "It is not a hard question. I was 5. I would have been the only child in the passages who did not belong to anybody. Somebody would have had to feed me. Somebody would have had to put me somewhere at night." She was crying and she did not care, and she was not going to stop. "You have told me twice today that you did not know. I am not asking you what you knew. I am asking you what you saw." Osric put a hand out toward her and she moved away from it. "Say it," she said. And Casimir Rook, king of Ardenmoor, alpha of 100 holdings, knelt on the frozen stone of his own yard in front of a woman he had called a bargain, and did not say anything at all. That was the answer. Nerida got up. She got up without his hand and she stepped back from him, and behind her, Anselm Varga's riders were coming through the postern at a run with their weapons already out, and she turned away from the King of Ardenmoor and did not look at him again. "I am going north," she said. "Today." She did not go north that day. She went as far as the record house, because Osric Vane asked her for 1 hour, and because Tavi said the thing that stopped all three of them in the doorway. "There is a box. Tavi, there is a box on the high shelf, and it has been there since before I was born, and it is not a ledger." He was already climbing. "The king comes for it every year on the 11th of the thaw. He signs for it, and he sits with it for an hour, and he never opens it, and he signs it back in. I asked my master once, and my master said, 'Do not ever ask that again.'" He brought it down. It was a plain wooden box the length of a forearm, and there was wax across the seam of it, and pressed into the wax was the seal of Ardenmoor, and a line of writing so small that Nerida had to bring the lamp down to the table to read it. "To be opened by the next king of Ardenmoor when the ring comes to close." Casimir stood in the doorway of the record house with Frost still on his shoulders and looked at the box on the table. "My father put that there," he said. "He died when I was 19. He told me on the last night that there was a thing in the record house I would know when to open, and that until I knew, I was not to touch it." His hand was not steady. "I have gone in there every year on the day he died and sat with it and had no idea what I was waiting for." "Open it," Nerida said. He broke the seal. Inside was a folded parchment and a smaller thing wrapped in linen, and Casimir took out the parchment and unfolded it on the table and did not speak for a long time. It was the Treaty of the Iron Ford. Not the standing copy. The sheet that should have gone into the fire 19 winters ago and had not, because a frightened king had taken it off the clerk's table and hidden it instead. The hand ran the same from the first word to the last, one hand, no gaps and no crowding, and the wax at the foot of it carried a seal with a ring that did not close, and clause 8 was not cramped, and it did not say Ward, and it did not say Nerida fell. Osric read it aloud because Casimir could not. "And it is further agreed as the first and binding condition of this peace, that the child taken out of Sarnholt in the year of the burning, being Nyara of the northern line, daughter of Queen Ylvain, shall be returned living to her own house before the second thaw. And no peace shall stand between these kingdoms while she is held." The record house was very quiet. "Before the second thaw," Osric said. His voice cracked on it. 19 years. Nerida sat down slowly on the clerk's stool. It came to her then, not as a flood, but as a long, clean line drawn through everything, every fact she had ever been given about herself falling into a new order. She had not been born a foundling. There had been a war, and in the last year of it somebody had gone over the northern border and taken a 5-year-old child out of a stone room with a high window, because a stolen heir ends a war faster than an army does. And when the war ended and the terms were written, Sarnholt had asked for one thing above every other thing, above land and gold and prisoners, and Ardenmoor's king had signed his name under it and meant it, and it had not happened. "She took me to a croft," Nerida said. She was not sure she was speaking out loud. "Marte was hers. Marte was paid." "Marte Fell was her ladyship's woman for 30 years, Osric said. "We knew the name. We could never prove the child. And when I was 19, she brought me here. To hold you where she could see you." Osric's hands closed and opened. "A girl in a croft can be found. A girl inside the keep of an alpha king, papered as treaty property, cannot be asked after by any envoy in the world, because the moment you carry a title you become a matter of state, and matters of state go through the regent." Casimir had taken the linen bundle out of the box. He unwrapped it on the table with the care of a man handling something that might burn him, and inside it was a child's shoe. Very small. Northern work, the stitching still bright along the seam, the sole worn through at the toe the way small children wear them. Nobody said anything at all. He knew, Casimir said at last. Your father? He knew, and he wrote it down, and he sealed it, and he left it on a shelf for the next king to find. His voice had gone flat and strange. He was afraid of her. My father held this kingdom for 26 years, and he was afraid of his own sister, and so instead of putting her in a cell, he put the truth in a box and made it my problem, and then he died. He put his hand flat on the table. I have walked past that shelf every year of my adult life. Narita looked at the shoe. She thought about 5 winters of learning to be invisible. She thought about the servant's stare because it was warmer and because nobody used it. She thought about a note pinned to a bundle that she had carried in her pocket until it fell apart, and about how she had made herself want nothing at all, for years, because wanting things is what breaks people in her position, and she had been so proud of how little she wanted. And 100 leagues north of her, in a hall she could not remember, her mother had asked after her every year of her life, and had died 3 winters ago still asking, and the house had gone on asking after her without her. 9 times, Osric said quietly. Narita looked up. We sent envoys 9 times in 19 years, he said. I came 4 of them myself. The last one had come in the winter she was 19. Osric told it standing up, because he said he could not tell it sitting down. He had ridden in on the 2nd day of the frost fair with 2 men and a letter under the Queen's own hand, and he had waited in the outer yard for 6 hours, and the regent of Ardenmoor had come out to him personally and told him with great courtesy that no such person had ever been in this house. And while he waited, the household had gone back and forth across that yard around him. Servants with water, grooms with feed, girls carrying linen from the wash-house to the kitchen door. I have thought about it every day since I heard him say your name in that hall, Osric said. 6 hours. I sat on a mounting block in that yard for 6 hours. Nerida did not need him to finish. She had carried linen across that yard on frost fair days for 5 winters. She had done it in the winter she was 19. She had done it in the snow with her arms full and her head down, past strangers, past horses, past men in gray riding coats. Because you did not look at the guests. Because looking at guests was how a treaty ward got noticed, and being noticed was the only thing in the world she had been actively afraid of. She had walked past him. Odile did not deny it. That was the thing Nerida had not prepared for. She had gone up to that council chamber with the true treaty in her hands, and Sabine's written statement folded under it, and Osric on one side of her, and Anselm Varga on the other. And she had braced herself for an hour of lawyers. Odile looked at the parchment on the table for perhaps 4 heartbeats. Then she said, "Where was it?" "The record house," Casimir said. "On the high shelf. Where he left it." "Ah?" Something almost like admiration crossed her face. "He was cleverer than I gave him credit for. I looked in his rooms for 11 years. Aunt." "You want me to argue?" She sat down. She arranged her skirts. "I am not going to argue, Casimir. I am going to tell you. And then, you are going to do whatever you are going to do. And I would like it noted that I have never once in my life pretended to myself about any of this." She looked at Nerida. "There would have been war," she said. "That is the whole of it. Your mother's brother had 8,000 riders on the Iron Ford, and a grievance he had been feeding for a decade. And the only reason he did not cross was that we had you. Your father agreed to that peace because we had you. And the day we gave you back, the day the Northern Line was whole again and they owed us nothing, that man was going to come across the ford and burn every holding between here and the sea." Her hands were perfectly still in her lap. "So I did not give you back. And there was no war. And there has not been a war in 19 years, and every child born in the villages under this wall in those 19 years is alive, because of a decision I made in a stone room when I was 31 years old. You could have told the truth, Narita said. Any year. Any single year. Yes. Then why? Because after the first 5 years there was no version of the truth that did not end with me answering for it with my life, Odile said, and I found that I did not want to die. It is not more complicated than that. People imagine that great crimes are held up by great reasons. They are held up by ordinary cowardice. And by time. Casimir spoke without looking at her. Marte fell. Dead. 4 winters ago. Genuinely before you ask, and not by me. Her heart. Odile's mouth tightened for the first time. She wrote to me twice a year for 15 years, and I burned every letter, and I will tell you what was in all of them, since we are being thorough. She wanted to know if the girl was well. Narita found she had to hold the edge of the table. You brought me here at 19, she said. Why here? Why into this house? Because a girl in a croft can be found. Odile met her eyes. And because my nephew was 27 years old and unmarried, and I needed a reason to keep saying no to every match the elders put in front of him, and a house with a strange girl in it is a house with a story in it. You were extremely useful to me, and you were entirely unaware of it, and I have never once felt clean about it. And when he began to love her, Osric said. The room went very quiet. Odile looked at the wall for a moment. That, she said, was the only part I did not plan. And I will tell you honestly that it was the worst year of my life, because I understood that if it went one step further, he would move the earth to give her a name, and a named woman gets asked after. She smoothed her skirt. So I put a letter in her linens, and I brought it to the elders. And I sat in that chamber and I listened to my nephew tell a room full of wolves that the woman he loves is not a person, and I watched him mean it enough to save her, and I thought, there, that will hold it a few years more. Casimir stood up. He walked to the window and stood with his back to the room, and nobody spoke, and when he turned around, Nerida did not recognize his face. 9 envoys, he said. Casimir, you turned away 9 envoys. You stood in my yard and told a man from her mother's own house that no such person had ever lived here, while she carried linen past your elbow. He came back to the table. Say the number again. 9. Say the last one. The Frost Fair, Odile said. The winter she was 19. I was there, Casimir said. I remember the banner. I asked you who they were, and you said grain factors. The door opened. Sabine Corwin stood in it with her coat already on and her rings already off, and she looked at the parchment on the table and at Odile sitting very upright in her chair, and she did not need to be told a single thing. I have signed it, she said to Nerida. It is in the ledger. The boy has the witness mark. Then she turned to Odile. I am going home to my father's house, she said, and I am going to tell him myself, before somebody else does, that his daughter sold 5 years of a woman's life for a chair she never even sat in. She left the door open behind her. The 2 courts met at the Iron Ford on the shortest day of the year. It had been chosen for the crossing, not for the ceremony, and there was no hall to hold them, so they built the thing outdoors between the 2 banks. Sarnholt on the northern side under a wall of black pines, Ardenmoor on the southern under its own banners. Between them the frozen ford, and on it a long table, and around it, standing in the snow because there were not enough seats for a 10th of them, 6,000 people from both kingdoms. The true treaty was read aloud from the first word to the last. It took a long time. Osric Vane read it, because he had asked to, and his voice carried badly and nobody minded, and when he reached the 8th clause and said the name Nyara of the northern line, daughter of Queen Ilvain, a sound went through the northern bank like wind going through a wheat field. Then the forgery was read, then the ledger, then Sabine Corwin's statement, in her own hand, signed and witnessed. Then Casimir Rook, king of Ardenmoor, stood up on the ice in front of 6,000 people, and said that his kingdom had stood in breach of its first and binding condition for 19 years, and that no part of that breach would be defended by him, and that he had not known it, and that not knowing it was not a defense, and he would not offer it as one. He did not look at Nerita while he said it. She noticed that. She thought it was probably the only kindness left available to him. Odile Rook was brought out onto the ice. She walked without help. She had refused a cloak. She stood before the long table with her hands folded in the way she had stood in a tower room, and offered a girl a horse and a purse, and the charges were read against her, and she answered yes to every one of them without once elaborating. By the terms, Anselm Varga said, the sentence falls to the injured house. He turned to Nerita. It falls to you. The ford went silent. 6,000 people, and the only sound was the pines moving on the northern bank. Nerita stood up. She had thought about this every day since the box came down off the shelf. She had thought about the servant's stare and the note that fell apart and the mounting block in the yard, and about a woman writing twice a year for 20 years to ask if the girl was well, and about 6,000 people standing on a frozen river who had all been born inside the peace this woman had bought with her. You will not be killed, she said. Odile's head came up. You wanted to be understood, Nerita said. You have said so twice. You wanted somebody to sit still and hear the arithmetic and agree that you did a hard thing well. So here is your sentence. She put her hand flat on the true treaty. This will be copied out in full, and the forgery beside it, and the ledger beside that, and it will be read aloud in every holding of both kingdoms on the shortest day of every year, for as long as either throne stands. Your name will be in it, every time, and you will live in a house in the eastern hills with a roof and a fire and no visitors, and you will be alive on that day every year to know that it is being read. Odile did not move. You took 19 years from me, Nerita said, and I am not able to take them back. So I am taking the story. You do not get to be the woman who prevented a war. You are the woman who took a child, and everybody is going to say so, out loud, forever. For the first time since Nerita had known her, Odile Rook closed her eyes. They took her off the ice, and then Anselm Varga came around the long table carrying something wrapped in dark cloth, and the northern bank began to make a noise, and it grew, and by the time he reached her it had become something Nerita had no name for at all. This was your mother's, he said. Ylvain wore it until the winter she died, 3 years ago. I am her brother's son, and by the northern law it came to me when she went into the ground, and by that same law it leaves me the moment you put your hand on it. He looked out at both banks. I want every soul on this ice to understand what I am about to say. I have kept it. I have never once worn it. He unwrapped it. It was not a great thing. That surprised her most. A thin circle of northern silver, old, plain, with a break at the top where the metal did not quite meet. A ring that did not close. Nyara of the northern line, Anselm said, and his voice went out over the ice. Will you take it? Nerita looked past him. She looked at the southern bank, at the banners of Ardenmoor, at a man standing bareheaded in the snow among his own people with his hands at his sides, watching her, making no signal of any kind. Then she looked at the northern pines. I will take it, she said. He set it on her head. It was cold, and it was lighter than she had expected, and the sound that came off the northern bank went up into the black trees and did not stop for a long while. When it began to fade, she raised her hand, and it stopped altogether, and she found that she was already speaking before she had decided to. There has been talk, she said, on both banks, about a marriage. She felt Anselm go still beside her. I have been given away once by a document I never read, she said. I will not be given away again by a rumor. I am not marrying the northern throne. I am the northern throne. Casimir came north in the spring, when the ford had broken up, and the roads were bad. He came without banners and without escort, on one horse, and he waited at the outer gate of Sarnholt for 3 hours like any other traveler, because he had given orders in his own kingdom that nobody was to send word ahead of him. Nerida did not go out to him. She watched him from a high window in a stone room, and she thought about how strange it was that she had spent 5 winters learning the shape of a man's silences and could still read him at 200 paces, and then she sent word that he could come in. He looked older. She had not braced for that. "I am not here to ask for anything," he said. "Good. I brought the box." He set it on the table between them. "The shoe belongs here. So does the parchment. I am not going to keep them in a room in my house and call it grief." She did not thank him. He did not seem to expect it. They talked for an hour, badly, with long gaps in it. He told her that the elders had put 4 names in front of him before the snow melted, and he had refused all 4. She told him that she woke most mornings not knowing what language she had been dreaming in. Neither of them said the useful thing. At the door, he stopped. "I saw you," he said. "You asked me in the yard, and I did not answer you. I have thought about it every day since, and I owe you the answer." His jaw was tight. "I was 13. There was a small girl in the kitchen passage in the winter, and I asked who she was, and I was told she was a cook's niece, and I said, 'Oh,' and I went to my lesson. That is the whole of it. There is nothing else in it. I have gone looking for more, because more would at least be something, and there is nothing there. I said, 'Oh,' and I went to my lesson." "I know," Nerida said. "That is the part I cannot put down." "I know." She looked at him steadily. "You are going to have to carry it anyway. I am not going to help you with it, Casimir. That is not cruelty. It is simply that I have my own." He nodded slowly, and he took it, and he did not argue. And that was the first thing he had done in 19 years that made her think it might one day be possible. He was in the outer courtyard putting his foot in the stirrup when a voice stopped him. "Sir, you have to sign." Tavi had come north at the turn of the year with 2 crates of ledgers and an ink stain that had never entirely come off his cheek, and he was apprenticed now to the record house of Sarnholt, where he had been for 4 months and already knew where everything lived. He was holding a large book open across both arms. "Everyone signs," he said, "coming in and going out. My master says a house without a ledger is just a house full of people." Casimir looked at the book. Then he took the pen the boy held out, and he bent over the page and he wrote his name in the visitors' column of the Northern Record House on a cold spring morning. Tavi turned the book around to check it, the way he had been taught, and nodded once, and closed it. "You are in the ledger now," he said. "That means you can come back." Casimir did not answer him. He stood in the courtyard for a moment with his hand on the horse's neck and his back to the tower window, and he did not look up, and he did not see the woman standing at it. But she was standing at it, and when he rode out through the northern gate she was still there. And she stayed there until he was a long way down the road, and she did not once let herself decide what that meant. Thank you so much for staying with this story all the way to the end. If Nyara's long road out of Ardenmoor moved you even half as much as it moved me while I was telling it, then it was worth every word. If you enjoyed it, please tap the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so the next story finds its way to you. And before you go, I would love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments what you would have done with Odile if that sentence had been yours to give. I read every single comment, and your answers are always the best part of my week. Until the next story, take care of yourself, and may the moonlight every road you walk.